The blood had been there for 3 years. Isla's knees burned against marble as she scrubbed the stain where her parents died, until Alpha Riker's voice cut through the throne room. "Princess, come here." Every wolf went silent. The collar at her throat heated. She'd survived 1,095 days of this hell. Today, everything would change. The blood never truly left the marble. Isla's knees ached against the throne room floor, her fingers raw and pruned from 3 hours of scrubbing. The water in her bucket had turned pink an hour ago, rusty now, but the stain beneath her hands remained. A shadow burned into white stone. Her father's blood, or her mother's. After 3 years, she could no longer remember which of them had fallen here, in this exact spot, 3 feet from the dais where Alpha Riker Voss now held court. The silver collar around her throat burned with each breath. "The northern border holds," a pack member reported, his voice echoing off vaulted ceilings that had once rung with her mother's laughter. "No breaches since the winter." Isla pressed harder against the stain, willing it to disappear, willing herself to disappear. The rough bristles of the brush scraped stone, a rhythmic whisper that had become the soundtrack to her life. Scrub, rinse, repeat. The collar heated with her rising pulse, a reminder built into the very metal. You are nothing now. "And the eastern villages?" Riker's voice carried that low, dangerous quality that made lesser wolves drop their eyes. She didn't have to look to know he sat on her father's throne, one leg crossed over the other. The picture of casual dominance. She had looked once, that first week. The sight of him there, relaxed and confident in a seat still warm with her family's memory, had made her vomit in the corridor afterward. "Compliant, Alpha." The tithes arrived on schedule. Her tithes, her villages, her people, now feeding the wolves who'd slaughtered their way through the palace gates. The scent of wet stone and lye soap filled her nose, a mercy. It covered the other smells, male musk and leather, blood and ash, the particular combination that meant predator. The throne room held 30 of them this morning. She'd counted their footsteps as they entered, the way she counted everything now. 30 pairs of boots on marble that had once reflected candlelight during balls where she danced until dawn. "The princess looks industrious today." Isla's hand stilled on the brush. The voice belonged to Garrett, one of Riker's lieutenants, a brute with scarred knuckles and breath that reeked of meat. "Perhaps she's trying to scrub away her sins," another added, and several wolves laughed. The collar flared hot enough to make her gasp. She bit her tongue, tasting copper, and resumed scrubbing. Show nothing, feel nothing, survive. Enough. Riker's single word cut through the laughter like a blade. Silence fell so completely that Isla heard the water dripping from her brush, each drop a tiny percussion against stone. She works. That's more than most royals ever managed. The words should have felt like a defense. Instead, they scraped like the brush. Another kind of humiliation. To need protection from the man who destroyed her. Isla dipped the brush in the bucket, watching pink water swirl. Her reflection stared back, distorted and broken. Hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath gray eyes that had once sparkled at suitors in sunshine. Blonde hair, once carefully curled, now hung in a limp braid down her back, unwashed except when she could steal moments at the servant's pump. 3 years ago, she'd been Princess Isla Thorne, heir to the lunar throne, beloved by her people, promised to a prince from the southern kingdoms. Now she was nothing. The brush moved in circles, hypnotic. Her mind drifted, the way it always did during these endless hours of labor, slipping backward through time like water through cupped hands. The night of the invasion, she'd been in the garden, 17 years old and restless, sneaking away from her own engagement celebration to breathe air that didn't taste of wine and false congratulations. She'd been arguing with the roses, telling them she didn't want to marry a man she'd never met when the screams began. Not human screams. Wolf howls. She'd run toward the palace, silk skirts tangling around her legs, and stopped at the garden gate. Wolves poured through her home like a flood. Massive shapes that moved wrong, too fast, muscles rippling beneath fur in the torchlight. The scent of blood hit her first. Then the sounds, breaking glass, tearing fabric, her mother's voice raised in a command that cut off mid-word. Isla had frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide in the forest and never look back. But her parents were inside, her people were inside. She'd made it as far as the throne room. Her father lay at the base of his throne, throat torn open, eyes staring at nothing. Her mother knelt beside him, blood spreading across her silver gown, one hand pressed to a wound in her side that pulsed with each heartbeat. Guards lay scattered like broken dolls, their weapons useless against wolves who moved like shadows. And standing in the center of the carnage, human-shaped but radiating a presence that made Isla's knees buckle, stood Alpha Riker Voss. Blood spattered his face. His eyes, gold, burning gold, locked onto hers. "The princess," he'd said, and every wolf in the room turned to look at her. Her mother had tried to stand, failed. "Run, Isla! Run!" "No." Riker's voice carried a weight that made Isla's bones ache. He'd walked toward her, boots leaving red prints on white marble, and she'd stood transfixed like prey before a predator. When he'd stopped an arm's length away, she'd smelled pine and smoke on him, and beneath that, something wild that had no name. "You have a choice, princess," he'd said softly, as though they were alone, as though her world wasn't ending around them. "Die with honor like your parents, or live without it." She should have chosen death. Every story, every legend said the noble thing was to die with dignity rather than submit. But Isla had looked past him to her mother's face, watched the light fading from eyes that had sung her lullabies, and thought, "If I die, who will remember them?" "I'll live," she'd whispered. Something had flickered in Riker's golden eyes. Surprise? Disappointment? It vanished too quickly to name. "Then kneel." She'd knelt in her father's blood. Riker had produced a collar from his coat, silver, etched with runes that hurt to look at, and locked it around her throat. The metal had seared her skin, and she'd screamed as power drained from her veins like water from a punctured skin. The wolves had laughed. "You are pack property now," Riker had announced to the room. "Anyone who touches her answers to me." It wasn't mercy. She'd learned that in the days that followed, when she'd been stripped of her gowns and given rags, when she'd been assigned to the lowest work, scrubbing, hauling, emptying chamber pots. The collar suppressed whatever latent power ran in royal bloodlines, leaving her as weak as a human. The pack could have killed her 1,000 times over. Instead, they made her watch as they took her home. A sharp crack brought Isla back to the present. She'd pressed too hard on the brush. The wooden handle had splintered in her grip. Blood welled from her palm where a piece had stabbed through skin. "Clumsy," someone muttered. Isla set the broken brush aside and wrapped her hand in her apron, applying pressure. The blood seeped through gray fabric, bright and obscene. Her blood had once been valuable, royal, worth alliances and wars. Now it was just red. "Princess." The word sent ice down her spine. Isla looked up slowly, knowing what she'd see. Riker stood at the edge of the dais, golden eyes fixed on her bleeding hand. The entire court had gone silent again, 30 wolves watching the tableau with predatory interest. "Alpha?" She kept her voice flat, empty. "Show nothing." "Come here." Her stomach dropped. 3 years, and those 2 words still made her want to bolt. But running was impossible with the collar, and pointless besides. There was nowhere in this kingdom, nowhere in this world, that the Alpha's reach didn't extend. Isla rose on shaking legs, leaving the bucket and broken brush behind. Blood dripped from her wrapped hand, tap, tap, tap on marble, a trail leading to the dais. She felt every eye on her, hungry, waiting. Pack law said she was Riker's property, but it also said property could be discarded. She stopped at the base of the steps, 5 feet below where he stood, close enough to see the dark stubble along his jaw, the way his black hair had grown slightly too long, curling behind his ears. He wore simple clothes, leather pants, a dark tunic, but power clung to him like a second skin. 3 years, and she still couldn't look directly at his face for long. Not because of fear, though fear lived in her bones now, but because some treacherous part of her remembered thinking, in that first moment in the garden doorway, before she'd seen the blood, he's beautiful. She hated that part of herself most of all. "Show me." Riker descended 2 steps, and suddenly the distance between them collapsed to nothing. Isla unwrapped her hand. The splinter had gone deep. Blood pooled in her palm, dripping between her fingers. It should have hurt more than it did, but the collar seemed to dull everything, even pain. Riker caught her wrist. His hand was warm, calloused, gentle in a way that made her chest constrict. He turned her palm upward, studying the wound with an intensity that seemed excessive for a simple injury. "You need salve," he said, "and bandages. I'll manage, Alpha." That wasn't a suggestion. His thumb pressed against her wrist, feeling her pulse. Could he sense how it jumped beneath his touch? "Report to my chambers in 1 hour. I'll have the supplies ready." The throne room erupted in whispers. Isla's blood ran cold. His chambers. She'd been summoned to private audiences before, questioned about palace secrets, former allies, anything Riker thought she might know, but always in the study, never his personal rooms. "Is that necessary?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "It's just a cut. 1 hour, Princess." Riker released her wrist and stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Don't make me send someone to collect you." He turned and walked back to the throne, dismissing her. The audience continued as though nothing had happened, reports droning on about borders and villages and matters of pack business. Isla wrapped her hand again and retreated from the throne room, her mind spinning. Behind her, she heard Garrett mutter something that ended in laughter. The corridors stretched empty and cold, afternoon light slanting through windows that overlooked gardens gone wild. Her feet carried her on autopilot toward the servants' quarters, a warren of small rooms in what had once been storage cellars. She shared a space with 3 other women, former palace maids who'd survived the invasion by being useful. The room was empty when she arrived. Isla sank onto her pallet, a thin mattress on a wooden frame, and stared at her bleeding hand. 1 hour. His chambers. She'd heard stories about what happened to women summoned to Alpha's private rooms. The pack spoke freely around her, as though she were furniture, and their tales were vivid. Brutal. She'd spent 3 years bracing for the moment Riker would decide to, but he hadn't. In 3 years, he'd never touched her beyond necessary restraint, never looked at her with the hunger she saw in other wolves' eyes. She'd told herself it was because she was beneath his notice, a broken toy he'd grown bored with. So why summon her now? Why the gentleness in the throne room, the concern over a minor injury? Curiosity is the first step toward mistakes. Her mother's voice, a memory so vivid it hurt. Isla stood and moved to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The face that stared back was a stranger's, gaunt, haunted, aged beyond her 20 years. She pulled her braid over one shoulder and worked her fingers through the plait, loosening it. Dirt and straw fell out. When had she last properly washed her hair? Days? Weeks? She couldn't go to the Alpha looking like this. The thought came unbidden, and she hated herself for it. Why should she care what he thought? He destroyed her life. He deserved to see her at her worst. But survival had taught her that small dignities mattered, that holding on to scraps of self-respect was the difference between living and existing. Isla found a relatively clean rag and scrubbed her face at the wash basin, using water so cold it stung. She rebraided her hair, fingers quick from muscle memory. There was nothing to be done about the clothes. Rough spun wool, gray and shapeless. But she picked the worst of the straw from the fabric. When she looked in the mirror again, she looked slightly more human. It would have to do. The hour passed too quickly and too slowly. When the bells tolled, another reminder that time itself had been stolen. Those bells had once marked her music lessons, her riding hours. Isla left the servants' quarters and began the long walk to the Alpha's chambers. The palace felt different at this time of day. Quieter. Shadows pooled in corners, and her footsteps echoed on stone. She passed portraits of her ancestors, their painted eyes following her progress. 7 generations of Thorn rulers, and she was the last, the one who'd knelt. I had no choice, she told them silently. I was 17. The painted eyes offered no forgiveness. The Alpha's chambers occupied the entire East Wing, rooms that had belonged to visiting dignitaries and her older brother before fever took him when Isla was 12. She'd avoided this section of the palace for 3 years, taking longer routes to her assigned tasks rather than walk these corridors. Now she had no choice. 2 guards stood outside the main doors, wolves in human form, with eyes that tracked her approach like she was something small and edible. The Alpha is expecting me, Isla said, keeping her voice steady. They didn't move. Should we search her? One asked the other. Make sure she's not carrying weapons? The second guard grinned, showing too many teeth. Oh, I think we should definitely search her, thoroughly. Isla's hand throbbed where she'd wrapped it. Blood had seeped through the makeshift bandage, fresh crimson against gray fabric. She met the first guard's eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. They both knew she was harmless, human weak, incapable of threatening anyone. The door opened from within. Riker filled the doorway, and both guards immediately straightened, dropping their eyes. Is there a problem? His voice carried that quiet danger that meant someone was about to bleed. No, Alpha, they said in unison. Then why is she still in the hallway? Neither guard answered. Riker's gaze shifted to Isla, and something in his expression made her stomach flip. Not quite anger, not quite concern. Something in between that she couldn't name. Come. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. Isla moved past him, close enough to catch his scent. Pine and smoke, always pine and smoke. Mixed with something sharper today, almost like wine. The door closed behind her with a finality that made her jump. The chambers were nothing like she'd expected. She'd imagined something brutal, masculine, sparse. Instead, she found herself in a sitting room lined with bookshelves, a fire crackling in the hearth. Comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. Soft rugs covered the floor. Lamps cast warm light that made the space feel almost cozy. You look surprised, Riker said, moving past her toward a cabinet. Isla caught herself. I didn't expect books. Why? Because wolves are mindless beasts? He pulled out a wooden box and set it on the table. Or because you think I personally destroyed your library during the invasion? Both, actually. She'd mourned her books almost as much as her family, the thousands of volumes collected over generations, reduced to ash in the fires that swept the West Wing. I saved what I could, Riker continued, opening the box to reveal bandages, salve, clean water. 300 texts, they're in the vault, preserved, including your favorite. Isla's breath caught. What? Tales of the Moon Court. Riker gestured to one of the chairs. Sit, let me see your hand. She didn't move. Couldn't. Her mind had snagged on the impossible fact that he knew her favorite book, the collection of legends her mother had read to her every night before bed. How do you? Sit, Isla. Her given name in his voice was a shock. He never used it. Always princess, mocking and distant. She sank into the chair without meaning to. Some autopilot response to the sudden intimacy of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in 3 years. Riker pulled another chair close and reached for her hand. She let him take it, too stunned to resist. His fingers unwrapped the blood-soaked apron, gentle despite their size, despite the claws she knew lived beneath human nails. The wound looked worse than she'd thought. The splinter had carved a deep gouge across her palm, the edges ragged and red. "This needs stitches," Riker said quietly. "I'll heal." Would she? Without her power, without proper food, she wasn't certain anymore what her body could do. "You'll scar." He met her eyes, and the gold in his was almost soft in the firelight. "Why didn't you stop when it broke? Why keep scrubbing with a broken brush?" Because stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant breaking. And she couldn't afford to break. "The floor wasn't clean," she said instead. Something flickered across Riker's face. Pain? Regret? It vanished before she could be sure. He reached for the clean water and a cloth, began washing the blood away with careful dabs that should have hurt but barely registered through the collar's suppression. "That stain is 3 years old," he said. "It's not coming out, you know that." "I have to try." "Why?" The question hung between them. Isla stared at her hand in his, at the contrast of her pale skin against his tanned fingers, and couldn't find an answer that didn't sound insane. "Because if I stop trying to fix this one thing, I'll remember that everything else is broken beyond repair." Riker seemed to hear the thought anyway. His jaw tightened as he dried her palm and reached for the salve. The paste smelled of herbs, comfrey, yarrow, something bitter she didn't recognize. He spread it gently across the wound, and the bleeding finally stopped. "I'm going to stitch it," he said, pulling needle and thread from the box. "It will hurt. The collar blocks your healing, but not all sensation." Isla nodded. She'd been hurt worse. She'd survived this. But when the needle pierced her skin, sliding through flesh to pull the edges of the wound together, she sucked in a sharp breath. Riker paused, looking up at her. "Should I stop?" "No." She forced herself to breathe slowly. "Finish." He did, working with surprising skill. Each stitch was precise, even, the work of someone who'd done this many times before. Isla watched his face instead of her hand, studying the concentration in his expression, the slight furrow between his brows. He looked younger like this, less the conquering alpha and more human. "Where did you learn to do this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Battlefield medicine." Riker tied off the final stitch and cut the thread. "Wolves heal fast, but not always fast enough. When you're dying and the nearest healer is 3 days away, you learn to improvise." He wrapped her hand in clean bandages, working in silence. Isla felt the oddness of the moment settle over her like a blanket. Sitting by a fire with the man who destroyed her life, being tended with a care that bordered on tenderness. "Why?" she asked. Riker secured the bandage and sat back. "Why what? Why this?" She gestured at her wrapped hand, at the comfortable room, at the impossible situation. "You've ignored me for 3 years, treated me like furniture. Now suddenly you care if I'm injured?" "I've never ignored you." The words landed like a blow. Isla stared at him, searching for the lie, but his expression remained steady. "You've watched me scrub floors," she said slowly. "You've watched me hauled, bleeding and bruised, from the kitchens when I collapsed from exhaustion. You've watched your wolves mock me, degrade me, and you've said nothing. How is that not ignoring me? You're still alive. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you'll get tonight." Riker stood and moved to a side table where a chessboard waited, pieces already arranged. Ivory and obsidian, the board itself inlaid with mother-of-pearl that caught the firelight. "Do you play?" Isla blinked at the non-sequitur. "What?" "Chess. Do you play?" He settled into the chair across from the board and gestured to the empty seat opposite. She should refuse. Should demand real answers. Should flee this strange, gentle version of her captor before he remembered who he was supposed to be. Instead, she stood and walked to the chess table. My father taught me, she said, sinking into the chair. The pieces gleamed between them, a small battlefield of carved stone. When I was 6. Then you know the rules. Riker moved a pawn forward, the classic opening. Play with me. It wasn't a request. Isla studied the board, then moved her own pawn to mirror his. An old strategy, one her father had favored, cautious, defensive, waiting to see what the opponent would reveal. They played in silence for several moves, the fire crackling, the soft click of pieces on wood the only sound. Isla found herself falling into the rhythm of it, her mind engaging with the puzzle in a way it hadn't been allowed to in years. The collar kept her magic suppressed, but it couldn't touch her mind. You played with your father in the garden, Riker said suddenly, moving his knight. Every morning before court, weather permitting. You'd sit beneath the rose arbor and argue about strategies. Isla's hand froze halfway to her bishop. How do you know that? You'd laugh when you won. This particular laugh, bright and triumphant, like you'd conquered the world instead of just a game. He leaned back, watching her face. And when you lost, you'd demand a rematch until your father had to physically carry you inside for lessons. Horror crept through her chest. You were watching me. Before the invasion. You were spying on us. Yes. The casual admission made her stomach turn. For how long? Does it matter? Riker gestured to the board. Your move. Isla's hand shook as she moved her bishop. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the information. If Riker had been surveilling them before the attack, it meant the invasion wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Calculated. Why? Her voice came out hoarse. Why study us? Why learn our routines, our habits? You could have just attacked. I could have. Riker moved his queen, an aggressive play that put her king in check. But I needed to understand what I was taking. Isla moved her king to safety, her thoughts spinning. Something was wrong here. Wrong with this whole scenario. With Riker's strange attentiveness, his careful watching, the books he'd saved. You're not making sense, she said. Conquerors don't preserve libraries. They don't learn their victims' favorite books. They don't play chess with them. Riker captured her knight. No, they usually don't. Then why are you? Instead of answering, he stood and walked to the far corner of the room. Isla hadn't noticed it before, but a large canvas stood there, covered with a white cloth. Her pulse quickened. I want to show you something, Riker said. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you'll have questions I'm not ready to answer. I already have questions. More questions? He rested his hand on the cloth. Questions that could get you killed if you asked them too loudly. Isla's mouth went dry. She should refuse. Should flee back to her servants' quarters and forget this whole strange evening happened. But curiosity had always been her weakness. Show me. Riker pulled the cloth away. The painting beneath stole Isla's breath. It was her, but not her, not the broken creature she'd become. The Isla in the painting was 17, maybe younger, standing in the palace gardens with sunlight in her hair. She wore a simple dress, pale blue, and she was laughing at something outside the frame. Her eyes sparkled. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, radiantly alive. Isla stood without meaning to, drawn toward the canvas. She'd never seen this painting, didn't remember posing for it. But the details were perfect, the exact shade of her hair, the small scar on her chin from falling out of a tree at age 9, even the silver bracelet her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, visible on one wrist. When? She couldn't finish the question. 4 years ago, Riker said quietly. I saw you in the market. You were sneaking away from your guards to buy bread for the street children. You gave a whole loaf to a boy who couldn't have been more than 5, and when he smiled at you, you laughed. Just like that. He gestured to the painting. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about you, so I painted it from memory. 4 years ago. A year before the invasion. Isla's mind struggled to process the timeline. You've been obsessed with me for 4 years? Her voice came out strangled. Yes. The simple admission was worse than any elaborate explanation could have been. Isla turned to face him and found Riker watching her with an expression she couldn't decode. Hunger and regret, and something almost like pain. You destroyed my life because you were obsessed with me? No. Riker moved closer, and she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he wanted to reach for her. I destroyed your life because I was trying to save it. That makes no sense. I know. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. But it's still true. Everything I've done, every cruelty, every humiliation, it's been to keep you alive. The collar isn't to punish you, Isla. It's to hide what you are. I'm nothing. The words tasted bitter. You made sure of that. No, you're everything. Riker's voice dropped to barely a whisper, and that's exactly the problem. Before she could respond, before she could demand an explanation, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Heavy, urgent. Riker's expression shifted instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind the mask of the Alpha. Out! He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a side door. Now! What? The main door burst open. 3 wolves entered, and Isla recognized them. Garrett, and 2 others from the morning's court. They stopped when they saw her, eyes gleaming with something that made her skin crawl. Alpha, Garrett said, but his gaze never left Isla. We need to discuss the northern situation. Privately. The princess was just leaving. Riker's hand tightened on her arm, a warning. Weren't you, princess? Isla understood. Whatever was happening, she couldn't be here for it. She nodded, mute, and let Riker guide her to the side door. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Garrett say, Interesting, keeping the pet in your private chambers. Does she entertain you well? The door closed before she heard Riker's response. Isla stood in the empty corridor, her bandaged hand throbbing, her mind a chaos of confusion and fear and questions that multiplied like rabbits. The painting, the chess game, the careful way Riker had tended her wound, as though she mattered. Everything I've done is to keep you alive. What did that mean? What was she that needed hiding? She started walking, not toward the servants' quarters, but deeper into the palace, to the library, or what remained of it. If Riker had saved 300 books, including her favorite, maybe there were answers hidden in those pages. The collar heated against her throat, a warning. But Isla ignored it. For the first time in 3 years, she had a thread to pull, and she was going to pull it until something unraveled. Behind her in the Alpha's chambers, she heard raised voices, an argument, then a sound that might have been breaking furniture or breaking bones. Isla walked faster, her heart pounding. The painted version of herself, young and laughing and whole, burned into her mind like a brand. Curiosity is dangerous, princess, Riker had said. But curiosity was also the first step toward truth, and Isla was done being kept in the dark. The library was a graveyard. Isla stood in what had once been the heart of her family's legacy. 3 stories of books, scrolls, and manuscripts collected over 7 generations, and saw only ash and ruin. The fire had consumed everything. Charred shelves leaned at drunken angles, their contents reduced to blackened husks. The smell of old smoke still clung to the air, acrid and bitter, mixed with the musty decay of water damage from the winter rains that had poured through the collapsed roof. Moonlight slanted through the gaps above, turning the destruction silver and strange. Isla picked her way across debris, her bandaged hand aching with each movement. She'd come here looking for answers, for the 300 books Riker claimed to have saved. But there was nothing, just destruction and ghosts. A sound behind her made her freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone had followed her. Isla turned, her pulse spiking, but the doorway remained empty. The footsteps stopped. She waited, counting her heartbeats, but whoever had been there didn't appear. "I know you're there," she said quietly. Silence answered. Then, after a long moment, a low chuckle drifted from the shadows. "Still brave, princess, or still foolish? I never could tell which." An old woman emerged from behind a fallen bookshelf, bent with age but sharp-eyed. Isla recognized her instantly. Mira, the palace librarian, who'd been ancient even when Isla was a child learning to read. "Mira," Isla's voice cracked. "You're alive?" "Barely and rarely." The old woman shuffled closer, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. "I hide in the walls mostly. The wolves don't notice old women who smell like dust and mothballs." Relief flooded through Isla, followed immediately by caution. 3 years had taught her to trust nothing, no one. But Mira had taught her to read, had guided her through her mother's collection of histories and legends, had been more grandmother than servant. "Why are you here?" Mira asked, her eyes too knowing in the moonlight. "I was looking for—" Isla stopped. How much could she reveal? "Books. I heard some were saved." "The Alpha's vault, you mean?" Mira's expression soured. "Yes. He took the best, locked them away where no one can touch them. Quite the collector, our conqueror. Though I wonder what use a wolf has for poetry and philosophy." "He reads them," Isla said, then wished she hadn't when Mira's eyebrows rose. "Does he now? And how would you know that?" Isla's cheeks heated. "I saw his chambers. There were books. His chambers." Mira's lips pursed. "Should I be worried about you, child?" "No, it's not." Isla's throat tightened. "He summoned me to tend a wound. That's all." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Be careful. Wolves are never simple creatures, and that one least of all. I've seen him walking these halls at night, when he thinks no one watches. He comes here sometimes, to this ruin, and stands where your mother's favorite chair used to be. Just stands there, staring at nothing." The image unsettled Isla more than it should have. "Why? Why does anyone haunt the places they've destroyed?" Mira shrugged. "Guilt, maybe. Or something stranger. That Alpha isn't what he seems, princess. Mark my words. Nothing is what it seems anymore." Isla wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild night. "I should go back. If they find me here—" "They won't. Not tonight. The pack is occupied with northern business. Some dispute about territory lines that has them all snarling at each other." Mira reached into her tattered shawl and pulled out something small and dark. "I came to find you, actually. To give you this." She held out a black rose. Isla's breath stopped. The flower was perfect, each petal dark as midnight, the stem thornless and smooth. The royal rose of House Thorn, extinct since— "Where did you get this?" Her voice came out strangled. "It appeared in the garden 3 nights ago. One bloom, on a bush we all thought dead." Mira pressed the rose into Isla's uninjured hand. "The old magic is stirring. Child, can't you feel it?" Isla couldn't feel anything except the collar's constant suppression, but she didn't say so. She stared at the rose, impossibly real in her palm, and felt something crack open in her chest. What does it mean? It means someone remembers what was, or it means something is coming that needs to be remembered. Mira's expression softened. "Keep it hidden, keep it safe, and trust nothing the wolves tell you, not even the pretty lies wrapped in concern." Before Isla could respond, before she could ask what pretty lies the old woman meant, Mira melted back into the shadows. Her footsteps faded, leaving Isla alone with a flower that shouldn't exist, and questions that multiplied like shadows. She tucked the rose carefully into her sleeve and fled the library. The walk back to the servants' quarters felt longer than usual, every shadow a potential threat. But the palace remained quiet, most of the pack occupied with whatever northern business Mira had mentioned. Isla reached her room without incident and found it blessedly empty. She placed the black rose under her pallet, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, then lay down fully clothed. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the painting, herself, young and whole and laughing at something she could no longer remember how to feel. Everything I've done is to keep you alive. What did Riker mean? What was she that needed hiding behind a collar and humiliation? Dawn came eventually, gray and cold. Isla rose with the other servants and reported for her morning assignments. The palace moved around her in its usual brutal rhythm. Wolves shouting orders, servants scurrying to obey. The smell of cooking meat and unwashed bodies thick in the air. She was assigned to the kitchens today, hauling water from the well and scrubbing pots crusted with last night's feast. The work was mindless, leaving too much room for thought. "You look tired, girl." Isla glanced up to find Chef Marcus watching her, his scarred hands busy kneading dough. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with a face that might have been handsome before something clawed half of it to ribbons. She'd learned his story in pieces over the years. Royal Guard before the invasion, fought to the last, survived only because Riker needed someone who could cook for a pack of 50. "Didn't sleep well," Isla said, returning to the pot she was scrubbing. "None of us do." Marcus shaped the dough with practiced efficiency. "You hear about the northern dispute? Only that there is one. Border disagreement with the mountain packs. They're claiming Riker pushed too far into their territory, demanding he pull back or face consequences." Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Some of his own pack think he should fight, show strength, but the Alpha's been hesitant." Isla's hand stilled in the wash water. Riker, hesitant, the man who'd conquered her kingdom in a single night? "Why?" she asked quietly. Marcus glanced around, ensuring they were alone in this corner of the kitchen. "Because fighting the mountain packs would require pulling forces from here, leaving the palace less defended. And there are those who think that's exactly what someone wants." "Someone?" "Can't say more, but there's talk of letters, messages coming and going that the Alpha burns as soon as he reads them. One of the night guards saw smoke coming from his chambers at odd hours, caught the scent of burning paper." Marcus's voice went even lower. "A letter escaped the flames last week, fell behind the grate. The guard pulled it out before anyone noticed." Isla's pulse quickened. "What did it say?" "Don't know all of it. The guard can't read, but he recognized a name before he had to destroy it. Thorn. Your family name, princess." The pot slipped from Isla's numb fingers, clattering against the stone basin. Water sloshed over the sides. "Careful," Marcus said, his tone mild, but his eyes sharp with warning. "These stones get slippery." Isla retrieved the pot with shaking hands. Her mind raced. Letters containing her family name, received after the invasion, important enough for Riker to burn them. What did it mean? Who was writing to him about House Thorn? "The guard who found it," she whispered. "Can I speak with him?" Marcus's expression darkened. "He's dead. Fell from the North Tower 3 days ago. Broke his neck." Ice slid down Isla's spine. "Fell or was pushed? Does it matter? Dead is dead." Marcus returned to his dough, his movements forceful. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know something's happening, something bigger than border disputes, but I'm also telling you to be careful. Whatever game is being played here, we're all pieces on the board, and pieces get sacrificed." Before Isla could respond, the kitchen filled with noise. Other servants arriving, wolves coming to demand early meals, the chaos of morning routine swallowing any chance for private conversation. She worked through the day in a haze, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. Letters, her family name, a dead guard who'd seen too much. By the time evening fell and she was released from kitchen duty, Isla's nerves were strung tight as wire. She returned to her quarters to find the black rose exactly where she'd hidden it, still impossibly fresh, its petals soft as silk. Magic. Old magic, Mira had said. But what did a flower have to do with letters and conspiracies? She was still staring at the rose when one of her roommates entered. A girl named Clara, barely 16, who'd been a laundry maid before the invasion. "Message for you," Clara said, her voice nervous. She held out a folded piece of paper. "One of the Alpha's wolves left it, said you're to report to his chambers after dinner bell." Isla took the note with numb fingers. It was sealed with red wax, pressed with Riker's personal signet, a wolf's head in profile. "Did he say why?" Isla asked. Clara shook her head. "Just that you're expected. And that—" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the collar around Isla's neck. "That you should come alone. Of course. Always alone. Always at his mercy." Isla dismissed Clara with a nod and broke the seal. The note was brief, written in a strong, slanted hand. "Come to my chambers at 8th bell. We have unfinished business." Our unfinished business. Their chess game, interrupted by Garrett and the others. Or something else entirely. Isla tucked the note into her pocket and checked her bandaged hand. The stitches pulled when she flexed her fingers, but the wound was clean, already beginning to heal despite the collar's suppression. Riker had done good work. She spent the time until 8th bell in restless motion, pacing her small room, braiding and unbraiding her hair, trying to calm the anxiety that coiled in her stomach like a snake. Finally, when the bells began to toll, she left the servants' quarters and made her way through now familiar corridors to the Alpha's chambers. The same 2 guards stood outside his doors, but tonight they said nothing, just opened the entrance without comment, as though her presence here was expected. Normal. The thought unsettled her more than their usual mockery would have. Isla stepped inside and found the sitting room empty. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the bookshelves and comfortable furniture. The chessboard sat on its table, the pieces exactly where they'd left them. "Close the door." Riker's voice came from deeper in the chambers, beyond an archway she hadn't noticed before. Isla hesitated, then obeyed, the lock clicking with a finality that made her skin prickle. She found him in what appeared to be a study, smaller than the sitting room, lined with more books and maps, a large desk covered in papers and correspondence. He stood with his back to her, staring out a window that overlooked the eastern gardens, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. "You're drinking," Isla observed, very observant. Riker didn't turn. "Would you like some? It's from your father's private reserve, whiskey, aged 20 years. Quite excellent." The casual mention of her father, the appropriation of his belongings, should have made her angry. Instead, she felt only a hollow ache. "No, thank you. Suit yourself." Riker took a long drink, and Isla realized with a shock that he was already somewhat intoxicated. She could see it in the slight looseness of his posture, hear it in the way his words ran together at the edges. An intoxicated alpha was a dangerous alpha. "You summoned me," Isla said carefully, "for unfinished business." "Did I?" Riker turned finally, and she saw the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes that seemed deeper tonight. "I suppose I did. Sit, princess, finish our game." He gestured to the sitting room, and Isla had no choice but to obey. She returned to her seat at the chessboard while Riker settled across from her, refilling his glass from a bottle she hadn't noticed before. "Your move," he said, gesturing at the board with his glass. Whiskey sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Isla studied the pieces, trying to remember where they'd left off. She moved her bishop, completing a strategy her father had taught her years ago, a slow encirclement meant to limit the opponent's options. Riker countered immediately, his play aggressive and slightly reckless. Not his usual style. "What happened with the northern dispute?" Isla asked, hoping to understand his mood. "Nothing. Everything. Does it matter?" He drank again. "They want me to fight, to show strength, to prove I'm still the conqueror who destroyed kingdoms. And you don't want to fight them. I don't want to leave this palace undefended." Riker's golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "There are things here worth protecting." The weight of his gaze made her look away. Your books, you mean. Among other things. He moved his queen, capturing her knight. How's your hand? The sudden shift in topic made her blink. Better. The stitches hold. Good. I'd hate for my work to be wasted. He leaned back, swirling his whiskey. You know, I was a healer once. Before I became Alpha. Before I became this. Isla's hand froze halfway to her rook. A healer? Surprised? Most are. Riker's smile was bitter. Hard to imagine a man who's killed as many as I have once dedicated himself to saving lives. But there it is. One of life's little ironies. She didn't know what to say to that, so she made her move in silence. They played for several minutes, the only sounds the click of pieces and the crackle of the fire. But the tension in the room grew with each passing moment, thick enough to choke on. Why did you really summon me? Isla asked finally. It's not about chess. No. Riker finished his glass and set it aside. It's about trust, or the lack thereof. Tell me, Princess, what do you think of me? The question was a trap. It had to be. But the alcohol had loosened something in Riker's carefully controlled demeanor, and Isla found herself answering honestly. I think you're a monster. I think you destroyed everything I loved and then made me live in the ruins. I think you're cruel and dangerous and... She stopped, the collar heating against her throat. And, Riker prompted, and I don't understand you. The admission came out quieter than she intended. You save books. You play chess. You tend wounds with a healer's hands. You watch me like I'm something precious instead of something you own. Nothing about you makes sense. Good. Riker stood, moving to the window. If you understood me, you'd be in more danger than you already are. What does that mean? He didn't answer, just stared out at the gardens, his profile sharp in the firelight. Isla watched him, taking in the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the window frame like he needed the support. I was blackmailed, he said suddenly. 3 years ago. Someone came to me with information, evidence that would have destroyed my pack, killed everyone I'd sworn to protect. They gave me a choice. Invade your kingdom and take you captive, or watch everyone I love die. Isla's breath caught. You're lying. I wish I were. Riker turned to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her chest tighten. They had leverage. They had power. And they had a plan that required your kingdom to fall and you to survive it. So I did what they demanded. I conquered your home, killed your parents, and put that collar around your neck, and I've hated myself for it every single day since. Then take it off. Isla stood, her voice shaking. If you regret it so much, take off the collar and let me go. I can't. Why not? Because the collar is the only thing keeping you alive. Riker's shout echoed off the walls. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the gold in his eyes flickering like flames. The people who blackmailed me, they're still out there, still watching. If I remove the collar, if your power returns, they'll know, and they'll come for you. They'll complete whatever they started 3 years ago, and I won't be able to stop them. Isla's mind reeled. What power? I'm human. My family had some minor magical ability, but nothing that... You're not human, Isla. You never were. Riker's hand came up, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. Your parents hid it, bound it, kept you ignorant to protect you, but you're descended from the first werewolf queen, the one who could... He stopped abruptly, his expression shifting. Could what? Isla demanded. It doesn't matter. Not yet. Riker stepped back, running a hand through his hair. I've said too much. The whiskey loosened my tongue. Forget I mentioned it. Forget. Isla laughed, the sound harsh and broken. You just told me my entire life is a lie, that I have some kind of power, that you're protecting me from some unnamed threat, and you want me to forget. Yes, for your own safety, yes. Riker moved to the door, clearly intending to dismiss her. But Isla wasn't done. 3 years of submission, of silence, of swallowing her rage. It all crystallized into this moment. She followed him, her voice rising. "No, you don't get to drop these hints and then walk away. Who blackmailed you? What do they want? What am I?" "You're a weapon." Riker spun to face her, and the anguish in his expression stopped her cold. "You're a weapon neither of us knew existed, and now that you do, everyone wants to control you. The people who blackmailed me, your own former court, the mountain packs, even factions within my own wolves. They all want to use you for their own ends. So I keep you collared, keep you powerless, keep you hidden in plain sight as a broken princess, because if anyone realizes what you truly are, they'll tear you apart trying to claim you." The words hung between them, terrible and true. Isla felt the room tilt, her world restructuring around this new information. "The guard who found the letter," she said slowly. "The one Marcus told me about. He died because he saw my family name, didn't he? Because someone is writing to you about me." Riker's expression darkened. "What has Marcus told you?" "Enough." Isla lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "Someone is sending you letters. Letters you burn. Letters about House Thorn. Who is it? Who's threatening me?" "I don't know." Riker's admission sounded like it cost him. "The letters are unsigned, but they know things only someone very close to your family would know. And they've made it clear that if I don't follow their instructions exactly, you die." "What instructions?" "Keep you collared, keep you powerless, keep you—" He stopped, something flickering across his face. "Keep me what?" Isla pressed. "Alive." The word came out rough. "Just keep you alive. That's all they've demanded so far, but I know it won't last. Eventually they'll ask for more, and I don't know what I'll do when that happens." The raw honesty in his voice made Isla's throat tighten. She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to her hatred like armor. But looking at Riker now, exhausted, haunted, trapped in a web he didn't weave, she saw something she'd never allowed herself to see before. He was a prisoner too. "The painting," she said suddenly. "The one of me. When did you really paint it?" Riker's expression shifted. Something vulnerable breaking through. "4 years ago. Everything I told you was true. I saw you in the market, laughing with that child, and He trailed off, looking away. "I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how someone could be that bright in a world this dark. So I painted it. Kept it hidden. Looked at it when I needed to remember that good things existed. Then a year later, you destroyed my life." "Yes," his voice cracked. "Because the alternative was letting someone else destroy it worse." Isla didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to reconcile the man who painted her smile with the man who'd killed her parents. Didn't know how to feel about any of this. She needed air. Needed space. Needed... Her eye caught on the covered canvas in the corner, the one Riker had revealed last night. The cloth had been replaced, hiding her younger self from view. "I need to see it again," she said. "Isla, please." The word came out small, desperate. "Let me see who I was. Let me remember what I lost." Riker hesitated, then nodded. He walked to the canvas and pulled the cloth away. The painting gleamed in the firelight, just as beautiful and painful as she remembered. 17-year-old Isla, laughing at something beyond the frame, so full of life it hurt to look at her. Isla approached slowly, reaching out to trace the edge of the frame. The wood was warm beneath her fingers. She studied every detail, the exact curl of her hair, the way the sunlight caught in the fabric of her dress, the pure joy in her expression. "I don't remember how to look like that," she whispered. "How to feel like that. I know." Riker's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she felt his breath stir her hair. "I took it from you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." His hand came up, reaching past her shoulder, and for a wild moment, Isla thought he might touch her, might finally bridge the impossible distance between captor and captive. Instead, his fingers traced the painted version of her face, following the curve of her smile with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Just like I wasn't supposed to see you. But fate has a cruel sense of humor." Isla turned slowly, finding herself trapped between the painting and Riker's body. He didn't step back. She could see the gold in his eyes clearly now, bright and burning, reflecting firelight and something else, something that looked dangerously like longing. "Everything I've done, Isla." He paused, his jaw working. "Ask yourself why you're still breathing. In 3 years, I could have killed you 1,000 times, could have let my wolves have you, could have broken you beyond repair. But I didn't. Do you know why?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The collar heated against her throat, but whether from its own power or from the proximity of an alpha, she couldn't tell. "Because the thought of a world without you in it." Riker's voice broke. "Even hating me, even broken, even reduced to scrubbing floors and suffering. The thought of you not existing is worse than any torture I could endure." The confession hung between them, raw and terrible, and impossibly honest. Isla's mind spun, trying to process the implications. This wasn't the simple possessiveness of a conqueror. This was something far more dangerous. "You can't," she started, but Riker cut her off. "I can. I do, and it's destroying me." His hand dropped from the painting, clenching into a fist at his side. "Every day I see you scrubbing away at that blood stain, your family's blood, and I want to burn this entire palace down rather than watch you suffer. But I can't, because burning it down means exposing you, means giving your enemies exactly what they want." "Then tell me who they are." Isla's voice shook. "Let me fight them. You can't fight them without your power, and I can't free your power without signing your death warrant." Riker finally stepped back, creating space between them that felt like a chasm. So we're trapped, both of us, in a game where the only winning move is not to play. A sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps, rapid and purposeful. Someone was coming. Riker's entire demeanor shifted, the vulnerable man vanishing behind the Alpha's mask. He moved to the door just as someone knocked. 3 sharp raps that sounded urgent. "What?" Riker's voice was cold, controlled, showing no hint of the emotion from moments before. Garrett's voice filtered through the wood. "Alpha, we need you. There's been an incident at the northern border. The mountain packs have breached our territory. We're mobilizing." Riker swore under his breath. He glanced at Isla, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. The war between what he wanted and what he had to do. "I'll be there in 5 minutes, he called through the door. Then, quieter, to Isla, "You need to leave. Now, use the servants' passage. There's a door behind the bookshelf in the corner. It leads to the eastern corridor." "What's happening?" Isla asked. "What I was afraid of. Someone pushed the mountain packs into attacking, knowing I'd have to respond, knowing it would pull my forces away from the palace." Riker grabbed her shoulders, his grip urgent but gentle. "Listen to me. Until I return, stay in the servants' quarters. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust anyone, especially not the wolves who've been watching you too closely. Do you understand? You think someone here is working with your blackmailers? I know they are. I just don't know who yet." He released her, already moving toward his weapons. "Go, quickly." Isla wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but the urgency in Riker's voice was real. She hurried to the bookshelf he'd indicated, found the hidden latch, and slipped into the narrow passage beyond. The last thing she saw before the door closed was Riker strapping on his sword, his face set in grim lines, looking every inch the conqueror she'd feared for 3 years. The passage was dark and musty, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Isla felt her way along the stone walls, moving by touch and instinct. Behind her, she heard Riker leave his chambers, heard Garrett's voice raised in urgent report, heard the sound of wolves mobilizing for war. The palace was about to empty. The Alpha would be gone, his strongest fighters with him. and Isla would be left behind with whoever was betraying them both. The passage finally opened into a storage room in the eastern wing. Isla emerged, covered in dust and cobwebs. Her heart racing. She needed to get back to the servants' quarters, needed to hide until a figure stepped from the shadows. Isla gasped, stumbling back against the wall. But it was only Mira, the old librarian, her eyes bright in the darkness. "Quickly, child," Mira whispered. "We don't have much time. I need to show you something before the Alpha leaves, something he doesn't know exists." "What are you talking about?" The black rose wasn't chance. It was a message. Mira grabbed Isla's hand with surprising strength. "Your mother left something hidden in the palace before she died. Instructions, a warning. I only just found them. Behind a loose stone in the library foundations. They're meant for you, princess, and they change everything." Isla's blood ran cold. "Change everything how?" "Your mother knew the invasion was coming, knew about the conspiracy, and she left you a way to fight back." Mira pulled a folded paper from her shawl, pressing it into Isla's hand. "But you need to read it now, before the Alpha returns, because what's written there, he can't know. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Isla unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was her mother's, elegant and familiar, and seeing it after 3 years made her eyes burn. "My dearest Isla, if you're reading this, then I am dead and you are a prisoner. I'm sorry, my darling. I'm sorry I couldn't prevent what's coming. But I can give you a weapon. The collar you wear was designed by our family, generations ago, to suppress the royal bloodline's true power. We've used it to keep you safe, to keep you hidden from those who would use you as—" The sound of running footsteps made Isla jerk her head up. Someone was coming. Multiple someones, by the sound of it. "Hide the letter," Mira hissed. "Don't let anyone see it. Read it later when you're alone and safe. But remember, princess, nothing the Alpha has told you is the full truth. Your mother made sure you'd know what he's hiding." The old woman melted back into the shadows just as 3 wolves rounded the corner. They saw Isla and stopped, their expressions hungry and calculating. "Well, well," one of them said. "The Alpha's pet, all alone, and him about to leave for the northern border. How convenient." Isla's hand closed around the letter, crumpling it. She took a step back, but the wolves advanced, cutting off any escape. "He said no one was to touch her," the second wolf said, but he didn't sound like he cared much about that order. "He also said he'd be back in 3 days at the earliest," the third replied. "A lot can happen in 3 days, especially to a helpless human with no one to protect her." The collar burned hot against Isla's throat as the wolves closed in, and she realized with terrible clarity, Riker's protection only extended as far as his presence, and he was about to be very, very far away. Isla's hand shot to her pocket, fingers closing around the crumpled letter from her mother. The 3 wolves advancing on her moved with the lazy confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. "The Alpha won't like this," Isla said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "The Alpha won't know." The largest wolf, a man with a scar bisecting his lip, smiled with too many teeth. "Unless you plan to tell him. But that would require you surviving the next 3 days." They were close enough now that she could smell them, sweat and leather and the particular musk that meant danger. The collar heated against her throat. Useless. A reminder that she was powerless against even the weakest wolf in Riker's pack. "Step back," Isla commanded, putting every ounce of authority her mother had taught her into the words. "I am still a princess of House Thorn, and you will—" "You're nothing," the scarred wolf lunged. Isla threw herself sideways, hitting the stone floor hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Her bandaged hand screamed protest as she scrambled to her feet, but the wolves were already between her and the exit. "Nowhere to run, pet," one of them crooned. Then a voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Touch her and die." Everyone froze. Isla looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows. Not Mira this time, but a younger woman she recognized. Sarah, one of Riker's trackers, lean and dangerous with eyes that glowed amber in the dim light. The Alpha gave specific orders, Sarah continued, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. No one touches the princess, or did you three forget you're bound to follow his commands? He's leaving, the scarred wolf snarled. His orders don't hold. His orders hold until he releases you from them. Pack law. Sarah's smile was all teeth. Unless you're challenging his authority. I'm sure the Alpha would love to hear about that when he returns. The three wolves exchanged glances. Whatever they'd planned, they weren't willing to openly defy their Alpha. Not yet. Fine, the scarred one spat. But you can't watch her every moment. The Alpha will be gone for days. We'll have our chance. They retreated, melting back into the palace's shadows, but their threat lingered like smoke. Sarah moved to Isla's side, helping her up. Are you hurt? No, thank you for... Isla stopped, studying Sarah's face. Why did you help me? Because, unlike those idiots, I value my life. Sarah's expression was unreadable. The Alpha may be leaving, but his orders stand. And I have no desire to face his wrath when he returns. It wasn't loyalty, Isla realized. It was fear, but she'd take fear over malice any day. You need to get to the servants' quarters, Sarah said. Lock yourself in. Don't open the door for anyone except... A howl split the night, long and mournful. Then another and another. The sound of wolves mobilizing, heading toward the northern border. They're leaving now, Sarah said. The palace will be half empty within the hour. Stay hidden, princess, and pray the Alpha returns before something worse than those three finds you. She vanished into the darkness, leaving Isla alone with her racing heart and her mother's crumpled letter. Isla ran. Through corridors she knew by heart, past windows that showed wolves streaming from the palace gates in their true forms, massive shapes against the night sky. The exodus was swift and organized, and within minutes the palace felt hollow, emptied of the predatory presence that had saturated every stone for 3 years. She reached the servants' quarters and burst into her room. Empty. Her roommates were likely working late shifts or hiding from the chaos. Isla barred the door and collapsed onto her pallet, pulling out her mother's letter with shaking hands. The paper was creased and worn, as though her mother had folded and unfolded it many times before hiding it. Isla smoothed it against her knee and continued reading where she'd been interrupted. The collar you wear was designed by our family, generations ago, to suppress the royal bloodline's true power. We've used it to keep you safe, to keep you hidden from those who would use you as a key, a living weapon capable of breaking or forging pact bonds across the entire realm. You are descended from the first werewolf queen, Isla. Her blood runs pure in your veins, undiluted by centuries. And on your 21st birthday, during the blood moon, that power will fully awaken whether you wear a collar or not. There are those in our own court, people we trusted, who know this, who have been planning for years to use you in a ritual that will bind every pack in the kingdoms to their will. Your father and I discovered their conspiracy too late. By the time you read this, they will have acted. The invasion that's coming is not what it seems. The Alpha who conquers our kingdom is not your true enemy. Watch him carefully, my darling. He plays a dangerous game, and you are the prize he's trying to keep from falling into the wrong hands. Trust no one, especially not those who claim to act in your interest. And remember, on the blood moon, the collar will fail. Your power will emerge. When that happens, you must choose. The letter ended there, torn or unfinished. Isla stared at the words until they blurred, her mind struggling to process the implications. 21. She was 20 now. Her birthday was in 3 days. The blood moon. She'd overheard wolves talking about it, how the red moon would rise in 3 nights, a rare celestial event that happened once every decade. Her own court, conspiracy, ritual. The Alpha who conquers our kingdom is not your true enemy. Her mother had known the invasion was coming, had known Riker wasn't the real threat. But if Riker was trying to protect her, Why had he killed her parents? Why the 3 years of suffering? Unless he'd had no choice. Isla's hands fisted in the paper. She needed answers. Real answers, not hints and half-truths. And with Riker gone, there was only one place to find them. His chambers. The thought was reckless, possibly suicidal. But Riker had mentioned letters. Correspondence he burned, threats from her enemies. If she could find those letters, read them, maybe she could piece together the truth. Isla waited until the palace quieted, until the sound of departing wolves faded into silence. Then she tucked her mother's letter into her bodice, unbarred her door, and slipped into the corridor. The palace at night was a different creature. Shadows pooled in corners like spilled ink. The few remaining guards were stationed at key points, gates, armory, the Alpha's war room, leaving the residential areas largely unpatrolled. Isla moved through the darkness like a ghost, years of servitude teaching her which stones creaked, which corridors echoed, where to step to remain silent. She reached Riker's chambers without incident. The guards were gone, pulled to the northern border with the rest. The door was locked, but Isla had watched enough servants work to know how to pick a simple bolt. She used a hairpin from her braid, working by feel until the mechanism clicked. The sitting room was dark except for dying embers in the hearth. Isla moved past the chessboard, their unfinished game still waiting, toward the study beyond. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If anyone caught her here, in the Alpha's private chambers without permission, the collar wouldn't save her. But she was done being powerless. Done accepting scraps of information while her life hung in the balance. The study was exactly as she remembered. Desk covered in papers, maps pinned to the walls, bookshelves lining every surface. Isla lit a small lamp, keeping the flame low, and began to search. The desk yielded nothing useful. Supply reports, patrol schedules, correspondence with other packs about mundane matters. She moved to the drawers, working methodically through each one. Most contained more of the same, but the bottom drawer stuck when she tried to open it. Isla knelt, examining the drawer more closely. There, a false bottom, cunningly disguised. Her fingers found the hidden catch, and the bottom panel lifted away. Beneath it lay a stack of letters, perhaps 30 in total, arranged chronologically by the dates written on their exteriors. The oldest was dated 4 years ago. The most recent, 3 days past. Isla's hands trembled as she pulled out the first letter and unfolded it. Alpha Voss, we know about your pack's indiscretion with the Eastern Territories. We have evidence of the massacre, names of witnesses who survived, testimony that would see you and yours executed for violating the peace accords. We are prepared to overlook this in exchange for a service. Princess Isla Thorne of the Lunar Kingdom possesses a rare bloodline that we require for our purposes. You will invade her kingdom, eliminate her parents, and take the princess captive. You will keep her alive and unharmed until we have need of her. Refuse, and we will deliver our evidence to the Council of Alphas. Your pack will be dissolved, your wolves scattered and killed. You have 3 days to decide. We will be in touch. No signature. Isla's stomach churned as she reached for the next letter. Alpha Voss, your compliance has been noted. The invasion proceeds as planned. Remember, the girl must survive. Put the suppression collar on her immediately. Her power cannot be allowed to manifest before we are ready. Continue to monitor her closely. We will send further instructions as the time approaches. Letter after letter, spanning 3 years, instructions on how to treat her. Keep her alive but broken, suppress her power, isolate her from potential allies, threats about what would happen if Riker failed to comply. And woven through them all, references to a ritual, to the blood moon, to her 21st birthday. Isla's hands shook as she read one from 6 months ago. The girl's birthday approaches. Preparations are underway. You have done well keeping her contained, but the critical moment is nearly upon us. On the night of the blood moon, we will come for her. Have her ready. The ritual requires her blood, her power, and her willing participation. though we have ways of ensuring cooperation. Any attempt to interfere will result in the execution of every wolf in your pack, starting with the children. Isla's vision blurred. Children. They were threatening children to ensure Riker's compliance. She forced herself to continue reading, to piece together the conspiracy. The letters revealed that her own advisors, Lord Theron, Lady Margrave, Commander Solace, all people she'd known her entire life, were the ones writing. They'd been planning this since before her birth, breeding her parents specifically to create her, a child with undiluted royal blood. The ritual would use her power to forge a bond with every pack in the kingdoms, giving the conspirators absolute control over all wolves. An empire built on her blood, and they'd manipulated Riker into becoming their unwitting prison guard. The most recent letter made Isla's blood run cold. Alpha Voss. She turns 21 in 3 days. The blood moon rises. Your task is nearly complete. We know you've grown. Attached to the girl. This was not unexpected. But sentiment will not save her. When we come, you will hand her over willingly, or we will take her by force. Either way, the ritual proceeds. Consider this your final warning. The guards you trust are ours. The wolves you command have been compromised. Even now, as you ride north to defend your borders from an attack we orchestrated, your precious princess sits undefended in a palace full of our agents. The invasion was your doing, Alpha, but her death will be on your hands if you continue to fight the inevitable. Complete your task. Deliver her to us. Or watch everyone you love burn. Isla clutched the letter, her mind racing. The northern attack was a diversion. The conspirators had engineered it to draw Riker away, leaving her vulnerable. And guards loyal to the conspirators, wolves Riker thought he could trust, were still in the palace. A sound in the outer chamber made Isla freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. She shoved the letters back into the hidden drawer and extinguished the lamp, plunging the study into darkness. Her heart thundered as she looked for an escape route. The window was too high. The servants' passage was on the other side of the sitting room, past whoever had just entered. Certain she's here? A voice drifted through the doorway. Lord Theron, one of her former advisors. The tracker saw her enter. She hasn't left. Lady Margrave's cold tones. The foolish girl is probably snooping for information. Then we'll have to accelerate the timeline. A third voice, male and rough. Commander Solace. The Alpha won't return for days. We can complete the ritual tonight, before he interferes. Isla's blood turned to ice. Tonight. They plan to take her tonight. What about the collar? Theron asked. It needs to come off for the ritual to work, but removing it will alert the Alpha through the pack bonds. Let it alert him. Margrave's voice dripped venom. By the time he returns, the ritual will be complete. He'll have no choice but to submit or die along with his pack. Their footsteps moved closer. Isla pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway, barely breathing. 3 of them, all older, stronger, loyal to a conspiracy that had murdered her parents. She had no weapons, no power, no way out. The study door opened. Isla ran. She burst from her hiding spot, shoving past Theron with enough force to send the older man stumbling. Margrave grabbed for her, nails raking across Isla's arm and drawing blood, but Isla twisted away and bolted for the outer door. Solace moved to intercept, but Isla dropped and slid across the polished floor, years of scrubbing teaching her exactly how slippery the stones could be. She shot between his legs and scrambled upright, reaching the door and wrenching it open. The corridor beyond wasn't empty. A dozen wolves stood waiting, and Isla recognized every one of them. Not Riker's loyal pack members, but the ones who'd watched her with hungry eyes, who'd mocked her suffering, who'd been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. Going somewhere, princess? The scarred wolf from earlier smiled. The masters said you might try to run. They asked us to convince you to stay. Isla backed into the chamber, her mind spinning through options and finding nothing. She was surrounded, outmatched, powerless. The collar kept her magic suppressed, kept her human weak and vulnerable. "Take her to the ritual chamber," Margrave ordered from behind Isla. "Carefully, we need her alive and relatively intact." Hands grabbed Isla from multiple directions. She fought anyway, kicking and clawing and biting like a feral thing. Someone struck her across the face, hard enough to make her vision spark. Blood filled her mouth, copper bright and sharp. They dragged her through the palace. Downstairs she descended 1,000 times as a free woman. Other servants cowered in doorways, watching but not intervening. Isla couldn't blame them. What could they do against wolves? The ritual chamber was in the palace's lowest level, in what had once been the royal family's private temple. Isla had prayed there as a child, lighting candles for her ancestors, feeling safe in the sacred space. Now it had been transformed into something else. Runes covered every surface, painted in what looked sickeningly like blood. Candles arranged in complex patterns filled the room with flickering light, and in the center, carved into the stone floor itself, was a massive circle inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at. "Put her in the circle," Theron commanded. They threw Isla down, and she felt the symbols flare hot beneath her. Power pulsed through the stone, ancient and hungry, making the collar around her throat burn like a brand. Margrave stepped forward, pulling a ceremonial knife from her robes. "We've waited 21 years for this moment, Princess. Your parents tried to stop us, tried to hide you, but some destinies cannot be avoided. You killed them." Isla's voice came out hoarse, broken. "You murdered your own king and queen. We did what was necessary." Margrave knelt beside the circle, her eyes cold. "They were weak. They refused to use you for the greater good. But we understand what you truly are, a key to ultimate power. And tonight, during the blood moon, we will unlock that power and reshape the world." "The blood moon isn't for 3 days," Isla said desperately. "Wrong." Solace pointed to the window high above. Through it, Isla could see the moon rising, and it was red, deep crimson, casting bloody light across the ritual chamber. "Did you really think we'd wait? We've been manipulating the timeline, feeding false information even to our own operatives. The true blood moon is tonight, and you, Princess, are about to fulfill your purpose." Margrave pressed the knife to Isla's collar. "This will hurt. The suppression collar is bonded to your flesh. Removing it forcibly is agonizing, but necessary." The knife bit into metal, and the collar began to crack. Isla screamed. It felt like her throat was being torn open, like fire was pouring into her veins, like every nerve in her body was being flayed. The collar had suppressed her power for 3 years, binding it so tightly that she'd forgotten it existed. Now it returned in a flood. Power crashed through Isla's body, raw and wild and overwhelming. She felt every wolf in the palace, their presences like flames in her mind. Felt their pack bonds, the invisible threads connecting them to their alpha. Felt the ritual circle hungry beneath her, trying to claim that power, to channel it, to use her as a conduit for something vast and terrible. "Hold her down," Margrave shouted. "The ritual must be completed before she gains control." The doors exploded inward. Riker stood in the doorway, covered in blood and dirt, his eyes burning gold with fury. Behind him, a dozen of his wolves, the loyal ones, the ones who'd ridden north with him, stood ready for violence. "Get away from her." His voice wasn't loud, didn't need to be. It carried the weight of absolute command, the power of an alpha pushed beyond his limits. "You're supposed to be at the northern border," Theron said, his confidence wavering. "I realized it was a trap 10 minutes after leaving." Riker's gaze never left Isla, taking in her position in the ritual circle, the cracked collar, the blood dripping from her throat. "I turned back, rode through the night, and arrived just in time to watch you make the last mistake of your miserable lives." He moved like lightning, covering the distance to the ritual circle in a heartbeat. The conspirators' wolves tried to stop him, but Riker tore through them like paper, claws extending, teeth flashing, pure violence given form. Margrave lunged at Isla with a knife, but Riker caught her wrist and twisted. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the chamber. The old woman screamed, dropping the blade. "You think I'm your captor?" Riker snarled, his hand closing around Isla's collar. "I'm her last line of defense. The collar isn't to humiliate her, it's to hide what she is. And you've just exposed her to every predator in this kingdom." He tore the collar away. The world exploded. Power erupted from Isla like a dam breaking. Silver light flooding the ritual chamber and racing outward through the palace, through the grounds, across the entire kingdom. She felt everything, every wolf, every pack bond, every connection between alpha and subordinate. And she felt them all turn toward her like flowers toward the sun, recognizing the source of the power that could unmake or remake their entire species. But something else came with the power. Memory, not her own. Her mother's. Her grandmother's. 7 generations of women who'd carried this gift, this curse, this terrible responsibility. She saw how they'd hidden it, suppressed it, bound it with collars and rituals to keep their daughters safe from those who would use them. She saw the first werewolf queen, ancient and powerful, who'd been able to forge pack bonds with a touch, to create or destroy them at will. Who'd use that power to unite the fractured packs into a single kingdom, bringing peace after centuries of war. And she saw how that queen had been murdered when her power became too great, too threatening to those who wanted control rather than unity. The same pattern, repeating through history. Women like her, killed or enslaved, their power stolen for someone else's ambition. The ritual circle beneath Isla pulsed, trying to claim her, trying to channel her power into the conspirators' design. She felt it reaching for her, felt the bindings they'd prepared, the compulsions written into every rune. But Isla wasn't some helpless vessel. She was her mother's daughter, her grandmother's heir, the last living descendant of the first queen, and she was done being used. Isla reached for the power flooding through her and pushed back against the ritual. The runes on the floor cracked, splintering under the force of her will. The candles exploded, wax spraying across the chamber. The entire temple shook, stones grinding against each other, mortar crumbling. "The ritual is collapsing!" Theron screamed. "She's rejecting the bindings!" "Then we take her by force!" Solace drew his sword. Riker stepped between them, his entire body radiating lethal intent. "You'll have to go through me first." "So be it." Solace attacked. The chamber descended into chaos. Riker's loyal wolves clashed with the conspirators' forces, tooth and claw and blade. Blood painted the ancient stones. Isla tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her, the power still overwhelming her system, burning through veins that had forgotten what it felt like to channel magic. Margrave lunged from the side, her broken wrist forgotten, her face twisted with desperate hunger. "If I can't control you, I'll kill you." Isla raised her hand. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't understand the power that answered her panic. But silver light exploded from her palm, catching Margrave mid-lunge and throwing the old woman backward. She hit the wall with a sickening crack and didn't move again. The remaining conspirators froze, staring at Isla with expressions caught between terror and avarice. "She's manifested," Theron whispered. "The power is active. We can still bind her, still force the ritual." An explosion rocked the palace. Then another, and another. The sound of breaking stone, of fire spreading, of something vast and terrible being unleashed. Riker's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. "No, they didn't." "We did." Solace smiled through bloody teeth. "If we can't have her, no one can. We've planted incendiaries throughout the palace, old magic, the kind that feeds on power like hers. When they ignite, this entire structure comes down. and the princess dies in the rubble. Horror flooded through Esla. The palace, her home. Everyone still inside. Servants, the few loyal pack members, innocents who had nothing to do with this conspiracy. "You'll kill your own people," she said. "Acceptable losses." Salas sheathed his sword. "We can always start again, find another bloodline, but we won't let the Alpha have you, won't let you become his weapon instead of ours." Another explosion, closer this time. The chamber's ceiling cracked, dust raining down. "We need to go." Riker grabbed Isla's arm, pulling her upright. "Now?" "The servants are already evacuating. I sent word the moment I realized what was happening." Riker's grip was gentle despite his urgency. "But we need to move. The palace is coming down." Isla looked at the conspirators. Theron and Salas, and a handful of wolves who'd chosen their masters over their alpha. They stood blocking the exit, weapons drawn, ready to die if it meant keeping her trapped. "They won't let us leave," she said. "Then they die." Riker's eyes blazed gold, and Isla felt his power rise, felt the Alpha's command ripple through the wolves in the chamber. The ones loyal to him responded instantly, moving to engage the conspirators. But the ones loyal to Theron and his allies resisted, their expressions twisting with effort as they fought against their Alpha's command. "They've broken the pack bonds," Riker said, his voice filled with shock and rage. "They've actually broken the bonds to defy me." "Because they think they'll have new bonds soon," Isla realized. "Once the ritual completes and they control my power, they can forge new pacts, new allegiances. They're betting everything on that." The ceiling cracked again, a massive chunk of stone crashing down into the ritual circle. The runes flared bright, then went dark, the magic destabilizing. "We're out of time." Riker released Isla and shifted. She'd never seen him transform before, had seen other wolves shift, but never the Alpha, never this close. His body exploded with muscle and fur, bones restructuring with sounds that should have been painful but seemed effortless. Within seconds, a massive black wolf stood where Riker had been, easily twice the size of any other wolf she'd seen. He looked back at her with those same golden eyes and lowered his body, a clear invitation. Isla understood. She couldn't walk, couldn't run, her legs still shaking from the power overload. But she could ride. She scrambled onto Riker's back, fisting her hands in his thick fur. He took off like an arrow, charging toward the conspirators who blocked the exit. They scattered, couldn't help it, the instinct to flee an attacking Alpha too strong. Riker crashed through their lines and burst into the corridor beyond, racing upstairs as the palace shook itself apart around them. Isla clung to his back, her mind struggling to process everything. The power still surged through her, silver and wild and seeking outlets. She felt pack bonds all around her. Riker's wolves, the conspirators' forces, even the few palace guards who'd remained neutral. Felt how she could reach out and touch those bonds, reshape them, break them, forge new ones. The temptation was overwhelming. To reach out and snap every connection the conspirators had, to leave them powerless and alone. But that was what they would have done. What they'd planned to do to every pack in the kingdoms. Isla wouldn't become them. Riker burst through the palace's main doors as another explosion tore through the west wing. Fire bloomed behind them, ancient and hungry, feeding on the magical residue that soaked the stones. Servants scattered across the grounds, some of Riker's wolves herding them to safety. Riker didn't stop running until they reached the forest edge. Only then did he slow, his massive body heaving with exertion. Isla slid from his back on shaking legs and turned to watch her home burn. The palace, 7 generations of her family, centuries of history, collapsed in on itself. Fire climbed toward the blood moon, painting the night in shades of crimson and gold. She watched the throne room's tower fall, the library's remaining walls crumble. The gardens where she'd played as a child disappear under rubble and flame. Everything she'd been trying to preserve for 3 years, gone in minutes. Riker shifted back to human form beside her, breathing hard. Blood covered his chest from a dozen wounds, but he didn't seem to notice. His attention was fixed on the burning palace, his expression carved from grief. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have returned sooner. Should have realized what they'd planned. You came back." Isla's voice cracked. "That's what matters." "I almost didn't." Riker's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I almost kept riding north, almost believed my own rationalizations about duty and defense. But then I felt it, the moment they cracked your collar, the power that flooded out. I felt you across 50 miles of forest, burning like the sun, and I knew I had to choose. Choose what? Duty or you? My pack or your life? Everything I've built over 30 years or the girl I painted because I couldn't stop thinking about her smile." He turned to face her, and Isla saw tears tracking through the dirt and blood on his face. "I chose you, Isla. I will always choose you. Even if it costs me everything." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, and terrifying in its implications. Isla stared at him. This man who'd destroyed her life to save it, who'd played prison guard for 3 years while secretly fighting to keep her alive, who'd abandoned his pack's defense to race back and tear apart the people threatening her. "Everything I've done," Riker continued, his voice breaking, "every cruelty, every humiliation, every moment I had to watch you suffer and pretend I didn't care. It was to keep you alive long enough to reach this moment, when your power manifested and you could finally protect yourself." "Why didn't you tell me?" Isla demanded. "Why let me hate you?" "Because if they knew I cared, they'd use you against me more than they already were. The only way to keep you safe was to make everyone believe you meant nothing, just a broken princess, a trophy I'd grown bored of." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "But you never meant nothing, Isla. From the moment I saw you laughing with that child in the market, you've meant everything." Isla's throat tightened. She wanted to rage at him, to curse him for the 3 years of suffering. But she'd read the letters, seen the threats, understood the impossible position he'd been trapped in, and she'd felt him choose her over everything else. "They'll regroup," she said instead, focusing on practicalities because the emotions were too vast to process. "Theron and Solace escaped. They'll find other allies, other ways to try to control my power. Let them try." Riker's smile was sharp, dangerous, the expression of a predator who'd been pushed too far. "Your power is manifested now. The collar is gone, and you've got something they never expected." "What's that?" "Me." He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. "An alpha who's willing to burn the world to keep you safe, who's already destroyed his own reputation, defied his pack bonds, and abandoned his territory's defense. I have nothing left to lose, Isla, which makes me the most dangerous thing they'll ever face." The palace collapsed completely, the final tower crumbling into flame. Isla watched her past turn to ash and felt something shift inside her. Not just the new power burning through her veins, but something deeper. A choice, a decision about who she would become now that the collar was gone and the truth was revealed. She could hate Riker for what he'd done, could walk away, use her new power to forge her own path, become the weapon everyone wanted her to be. Or she could accept that sometimes love looked like cruelty, that sometimes protection required sacrifice, that sometimes the monster was the only one brave enough to stand between you and the worst monsters. "Ask yourself why you're still breathing," Riker had said in his chambers. Now, standing in the ruins with power flooding her veins and the truth finally exposed, Isla understood. She was breathing because he'd chosen to let her, had fought for 3 years to ensure she survived long enough to become this, powerful, aware, capable of defending herself. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Riker's expression softened. "Now we run, we hide, we train you to control your power. And when you're ready, when you're strong enough to face what's coming, we hunt down everyone who tried to use you. every conspirator, every ally, every person who thought your blood was theirs to spill. Together. Together. He pressed his forehead to hers, and Isla felt the pack bond trying to form between them. Not a bond of dominance or control, but something mutual, something chosen. If you'll have me, if you can forgive what I've done. Isla pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She saw him flinch, saw the pain that caused. But I understand, and I'm willing to try to move forward, to see where this goes when we're not captor and prisoner. That's more than I deserve. Yes, she agreed. It is. A howl split the night. Not Riker's pack, but something else. Something from the palace ruins. Isla felt presences moving in the fire, shapes that shouldn't exist, creatures summoned by the ritual's incomplete magic. They're not done, Riker said grimly. The conspirators may have escaped, but they left something behind, something hungry. Isla felt it too, dark magic feeding on the flames, growing stronger. The ritual hadn't been completed, but it had been started. And incomplete magic was often the most dangerous kind. Can we fight it? She asked. Not here, not now. Riker took her hand. We need to get distance, get you somewhere safe where you can learn to use your power properly. Then we... Wait! Isla's attention snapped to the servants fleeing across the grounds. She reached out with her new senses and felt them, felt their terror, their confusion, their desperate need for guidance. They're running, but they don't know where to go, and there are wolves hunting them. She felt it clearly now. Conspirator wolves, the ones who'd broken their bonds to Riker, pursuing the fleeing servants. Hunting them like prey. I have to help them, Isla said. You can barely stand. Then carry me close enough. She met Riker's eyes. I won't let more innocents die because of me. Not when I finally have the power to stop it. Riker studied her face, and something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He nodded once and shifted back into his wolf form. Isla climbed onto his back, and Riker ran toward the fleeing servants. As they got closer, Isla reached out with her power, feeling for the pack bonds of the wolves doing the hunting. Found them, twisted, corrupted by the conspirators' magic, but still there. Still vulnerable to her touch. She'd never done this before. Had no training, no guidance, just instinct and desperate need. But she was the first queen's descendant. This was her birthright. Isla reached into those bonds and pulled. The wolves attacking the servants froze mid-stride. Isla felt their confusion, their panic as she severed their connection to the conspirators and left them floating, bondless, alone in a way that was anathema to their species. Then, before they could flee or attack, she offered something new. Not control, not domination, but choice. Join me, she sent through the new power. Not as slaves, not as tools, but as wolves who choose their own pack, their own loyalty, their own path. She felt their shock, felt them test the offer, looking for the trap, the hidden bindings, the compulsions that usually came with pack bonds. But Isla offered none of that. Just freedom and protection, and a chance to be something other than pawns in someone else's game. One by one, they accepted. New bonds formed, silver and strong, connecting them to her. Not the way they'd been connected to the conspirators or even to Riker, but something different. Something that let them keep their autonomy while choosing to stand together. 7 wolves, bondless and lost, finding a new pack, a new purpose, and a new alpha. Riker slowed as the transformed wolves approached, their heads lowered in submission. Not to him, but to the woman on his back. Isla slid from his body, her legs steadier now, her power settling into something manageable rather than overwhelming. The servants stopped fleeing, watching with wide eyes as their would-be attackers bowed before the princess they'd spent 3 years learning to dismiss as broken. Princess Isla, one of them whispered. Then another took up the cry. "Princess Isla!" The name spread through the crowd like wildfire. Servants knelt, recognizing not just her title but what she'd become. Their protector, their savior, their hope in a night of chaos and flame. Isla looked at them, her people, bloodied and terrified but alive, and felt something slot into place. A purpose. A responsibility she'd been born for but had never been allowed to claim. "Get them to safety," she told the newly bonded wolves. "The forest caves 2 miles north. Take them there and protect them until dawn." The wolves obeyed without question, herding the servants gently toward safety. As they departed, Isla turned back to the burning palace. The dark magic was still growing, still feeding, and somewhere in those ruins, the conspirators were regrouping, planning their next move. But Isla wasn't afraid anymore. She had power. She had allies. And she had an alpha who'd proven he'd do anything to keep her safe. The blood moon hung overhead, crimson and watchful. Isla raised her face to it and felt her mother's presence like a benediction, her grandmother's approval like a crown. She wasn't just a princess anymore. Wasn't just a prisoner freed or a weapon to be controlled. She was the last daughter of the first queen. And she was done hiding. "They wanted a ritual," Isla said softly, watching the flames. "They wanted to use my power to control the Pax, to build an empire on my blood." "Yes," Riker agreed, back in human form beside her. "Then let's give them a ritual." Isla's smile was sharp, dangerous, her mother's daughter to the core. "Let's show them what happens when the weapon they tried to forge decides to fight back." Riker's answering grin was all teeth. "What did you have in mind?" "Everything they fear," Isla said. "We're going to hunt down every conspirator, every ally, every person who thought they could use me. We're going to dismantle their plans, break their power, and show every pack in this kingdom that the old ways are ending." "That's ambitious." "I'm the girl who survived 3 years of your captivity," Isla countered. "I'm the weapon they couldn't control, and the queen they couldn't kill. Ambition is the least of what I'm capable of." She turned to face Riker fully, silver power crackling around her fingers, the mark of her heritage burning in her eyes. "So tell me, Alpha," she said, "are you ready to burn them all?" Riker took her hand, their fingers intertwining, their powers, his golden alpha dominance and her silver bloodline magic, sparking where they touched. "Princess," he said, and for the first time, the title carried not mockery, but reverence. "I've been ready since the moment I saw you laugh. Lead the way." Together, they turned from the burning palace and walked into the forest, 7 newly bonded wolves at their back and a kingdom full of enemies ahead. The blood moon watched their retreat, crimson light painting them in shades of fire and vengeance. And in the palace ruins, something ancient and dark stirred, drawn by the incomplete ritual and the power Isla had unleashed. The conspiracy had wanted to reshape the world using her blood. They were about to learn that some weapons chose their own targets, and Isla had just declared war.